Frank McCaffrey, and I am joined by ALG President Rick Manning. We ask that you please subscribe to our podcast. Check this out here. I'm pointing at the subscribe thing now. Of course, we're talking a lot about coronavirus these days. I'm stuck at my home here in South Texas. Rick is at his home in Maryland, and we're talking about recovery. Donald Trump just gave a press event, and I got to tell you, there were some interesting moments. One of the things he noticed that I've noticed is that the Washington Post seems like they've really gone off the deep end. Like they just gave up. Like they're angry. They're trying to sell papers. They're desperate. So just say whatever we want to say about Donald Trump. And it seems kind of bizarre. But Rick, is the media ever going to be fair in this coronavirus coverage? Does anyone expect them to be fair?
Well, I think the media has kind of lost all their credibility as a whole. But so people are, they have access to information. Heck, people are at home, so they can actually watch the press conferences from themselves and see what's actually going on. The media has lost. A lot of the media has lost their ability to be the intermediary, the people who provide the information and provide a fair-handed view of what's going on. Basically being transcribers of what's going on. Instead, they've become, analyzers of what's going on. And as a result, the American public says, "I don't need your analysis. Tell me what's happening."
Yeah.
And so people like papers like the Washington Post have lost their credibility. New York Times have lost their credibility because you no longer, even their subscribers and people who agree with them, they can't depend upon them for honest, factual information.
Absolutely. Now, I just wanted to bring this up because someone I know at the Washington Post had a very kind of strange, in the last couple of days, strange social media post. I just wanted to read it. It says, and this is a journalist. It sounds very different than what the journalist I would have known a few years ago would have said, but here's what it says. "Wow, didn't realize there were so many public health experts. Also, please refine critiques about the media and consider the media also includes countless tired individuals who want to make sure the public is informed with verifiable facts and guidance from reputable experts, particularly when our institutions are failing or misleading us." It just sounds like a really angry and bizarre and factually slightly inaccurate statement there. Down here in Texas, we've got, down here where I am in this region, a couple of vacationers tested positive for the coronavirus. In San Antonio, 25 cases, 95 in Texas, 3 deaths, 1 case in Tamaulipas, which is the south of our border here in Mexico. It's a pretty major thing, although I don't know if it's as big down here yet as it is in other parts of the country. It's still a pretty big deal.
To give you some perspective, the latest numbers on Texas is there's 200 confirmed cases. That puts Texas in the top 15 in terms of states and the number of cases. But when compared to New York State, which has 4,100 cases, 4,152, Washington State, which is 1,187, in New York State, there's 21 dead. In Washington State, there's 68 dead. 68 dead. So you've got and in Texas, by contrast, there are 3 people who've died from it.
Yes.
So in Texas, it hasn't really reached the vast population yet, unfortunately. But the reason why all the public health experts are urging people to engage in social distancing. The reason why your bars and restaurants are shut down unless you're doing takeout. The reason why those things have occurred is to make it so as few people get this as possible. When you have very few people who have it, the likelihood of coming in contact with somebody who's got it is relatively low. When you get the hundreds of thousands of people who have it, at that point your chances of coming in contact with somebody who's got it is exponentially higher. The objective here, once again, to overstate this case, is to make it so the growth of this thing is flat. Now that you hear that term all the time, but let me just explain what it means. It means the exposures are effectively limited over time. So you have a longer exposure period because not everybody gets it all at once, but you have a longer period to be able to find treatments that work, to have so the hospital systems don't get overrun, and allow for the overall system to work better. So by virtue of social distancing, what we're doing is we're trying to make certain that the exposure time, the amount of people who get exposed, remains relatively small, and if the healthcare system is able to help those people, and it doesn't get overrun because so many people get it all at once, what's called spike, or so many people get it all at once that suddenly the hospital emergency rooms are overrun with people who are sick from the coronavirus. So this is a controllable, manageable thing. It's something you can do about it. You can take control of your own life by doing the social distancing thing. And that's I think really important. Tests are being put out in a pretty rapid fashion. So we're seeing tests out around the country a little bit more. We're seeing and as a result, you're going to see the number of confirmed people who have coronavirus going up pretty rapidly. That doesn't necessarily mean that the virus is out of control. It means that we're now testing people who otherwise would just have a cold, and we're able to decide, and because we're testing them, we're going to now say, okay, you've tested positively for the virus. Now you need to go home and sequester yourself, be quarantined, and do that over a period of 14 days, however long the doctors say, in order to ensure that you're not infecting other people. That is that's the purpose of the testing that we're doing now. A lot more tests out there, and in the press conference the president just gave, Vice President Pence reported that they've changed the regulation to allow for industrial construction masks that are produced in pretty big quantities here domestically, that those can now be approved for healthcare users, for health workers. They hadn't been approved before for health workers, but they are now. So we're moving the regulatory kind of chains that we're stopping the production of masks and the like, and moving those chains, breaking them, so that our industrial capacity can be brought to bear to provide the very materials that you and I want to have, so we can go out.
The United States, a quarter. We're gonna lose a quarter. But then unemployment didn't start getting back to work. But how long does coronavirus recovery last? Do we
point to the Spanish flu in 1919? In the Spanish flu in 1919, we had already lost a great number of men from the World War I, right preceding it. Coming right off of that, we had the Spanish flu, which actually part of World War I at the end. Spanish flu ended up killing a lot of people, killed millions of people here in America. And so we sat there, we had millions of people dead, many of them young people, many of them working age people, at a time when our population was much lower, so it was a much more significant part of our economy. Yet, within a year, we were in the roaring 20s. Because the regulatory burdens didn't exist then, for one thing, so the economy business was able to grow rapidly. Capital existed to help business grow, and as a result of that, we ended up with a decade of high growth. Now, and so the ability to recover from this kind of downturn rapidly is there, and the reason why is because the economic fundamentals are not why we are having this downturn. The economic fundamentals were extremely strong prior to the emergency. So what we have to do is we have to keep those underlying fundamentals in place by basically saving the small businesses and taking efforts to make certain that those businesses are keeping people on their payroll rather than putting them into unemployment. And that way we will be able to create an environment where we will immediately, upon the end of this healthcare emergency, see a dramatic snapback in our economy, which should have an effect on the stock market and elsewhere. In the interim, and it's a 2-month interim, if you have a mortgage and you have a job take a look at refinancing. And if you can save $100, $150 on your mortgage, take a look at refinancing. It puts more cash in your pocket, and it's a side effect of this. And the Treasury bonds, or the 10 years, are very, very low. So you have which is what the mortgage is based off of. So you have an opportunity to really lower your interest rate on your mortgage. If you're in commercial building, same thing. Refinance, get the lower interest rate. Those are economic stimuli that people don't even think about, but it puts immediate money in your pocket on a month-to-month basis, lowers your overall basic costs, and allows you to have the dollars so that you can say, okay, well, I've been meaning to take the kids to Disneyland. Well, let's go, or wherever you want to do. I've been meaning to take a cruise. Let's go do that. Cruises are cheap, and we've got money in our pocket. So now's the time to be able to be smart and rearrange your finances to take advantage of the fact that interest rates are extremely low, and there's an opportunity to basically restructure your own family's finances and your business's finances.
Okay.
So take advantage of this time so you come out of it stronger financially than you went into it, even though the next month to 2 months are likely to be really, really kind of rough riding. Let's get through these 2 months, and then we'll be in a position where, yes, the economy is going to take off like a rocket ship.
Yeah, the market does bounce back, and that's another. I'm not going to be the one who comes out and says it, but I will say, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Buy low, sell high. That's the rule. A lot of people buy high, sell low, but the rule is to buy low, sell high, and wink, wink, nudge, nudge. When the market has crashed to below 20,000 by last check. And it fell from 29,000, so it has potential to go up about 10,000 points in a few months. Maybe it would be a good time to start buying. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay. Now,
it also may be a good time not to just sell. Unless you need your equities, don't sell low.
Oh, people buy high. They buy high and sell low.
Can sell low, but it's and once again, none of us know if where we're at now is a bottom, or if it goes down to 15,000, loses another 20%. Don't know. We're in uncharted waters because in order to deal with this health emergency, we have decided as a country, our elected officials have decided that they're going to temporarily kill the economy, stall the economy, and in order to try to freeze out the spread of this virus. And so I don't know, from a standpoint of when, the market is going to go up or go down. I don't know what's going to happen internationally. I do know that things like the oil prices are being dramatically affected, and they're down around, they were at 20, they hit 20 yesterday for West Texas Intermediate, I think was around 20, which is extremely low. But I don't know if that, when that's going to bounce back up. What I do know is about 20% of the oil sold in America goes to fuel that flies airplanes. If airplanes are not flying as much, that's significant on the demand for oil. And so at a time when the demand is low and their supply is high because the Saudis and Russians are dumping oil in the market, you're going to see price per barrel dramatically decrease. So, are we seeing it at the pump? Probably not as much as we will in the next week to 2 weeks. But we're going to see it at the pump, but we're not supposed to be driving around anyway. So that does look good. But just know that when you are having to drive around, that your gasoline is going to be cheaper, which is another cost saving for you. So if you decide to do a drive vacation in 2 months, when things get back to normal, well, that's another cost savings in terms of driving that you're likely to get that you wouldn't otherwise have. So in terms of costs, there's a lot of costs being lowered. The question is when will the overall economy rebound? And the goal of what Americans for Limited Government's been advocating in Congress is to do things to stem the tide that are temporary. We do not want to saddle ourselves with long-term spending to meet a short-term problem. And so we've been advocating temporary, targeted intervention, and something which we're likely to come out with tomorrow. I'll give you a little preview. Is we're contemplating internally whether to advocate for a 1 month bank holiday, where the banks are essentially say we're not going to collect any rents, any mortgage payments or the like. We're not going to collect those for a month. And what the commercial people would have to then agree to is that to get that is they'd have to agree not to collect rents from their renters for a month. And so by making it so people who with mortgages don't have to pay, and including commercial, then the commercial mortgage people would have to say, well, we're not going to collect rents. Now it's going to cost the commercial mortgage people a little bit of money, but overall, it'll keep. What's going to happen in this kind of emergency when people don't have money, when small businesses don't have money, they're not going to pay their rent. So those commercial mortgage people this helps them kind of stay afloat at a time when people aren't going to pay rent, and allows for, because by giving them an out for not having to pay their payments on their leases, essentially their rent. So it is it's an idea that I think has immediate cash benefits throughout the economy, and the Federal Reserve can backstop the banks in this pretty readily, and it's an immediate infusion in money into the economy simply by taking away a major expense for a month, which will help keep the small businesses afloat and keep them alive. So when we hit the end of this crisis, those small businesses are able to jump forward and actually move into an environment where they're able to open their doors, have employees working, and have people coming through the doors and go back to making money. So that's what we got to do. But we got to make certain that they survive in order, for a month to 2 months, so that they can open their doors and they can and they have their employees intact, and they're able to provide those services that they've been providing so well over the course of the last 10 years.
Okay, now, Rick, I have a theory that one thing that will come out of this coronavirus crisis that we'll be doing from now on is you'll see more people working remotely, working from home. Now, this brings up a point. Will Congress be able to vote remotely? They have to make decisions still, have to make some important decisions. Will they be able to vote remotely?
That's a great question. Right now, they're not allowed to. They have to change the House rules, the Senate rules to allow that. It's a pretty big transformative shift. And it's something which most people I would be skeptical of as occurring long term. But I think during this emergency that Congress needs to create emergency legislation where they are allowed to vote remotely. Otherwise, what you'll have is what we had this last weekend, where the House passed legislation on, it was 12:35 in the morning on Saturday morning, so it's Friday night, Saturday morning. The members of Congress went out of town. Next day, Nancy Pelosi says, listen, we've got to do technical amendments to this because the bill wasn't really written very well, because they rushed it, and because they want the congressmen to all go out of town. So they did technical amendments. Technical amendments are only supposed to deal with fixing things like we got a comma in the wrong place. This is unclear. We want to make this more clear what we meant. That's what technical amendments are supposed to do. And she asked for however, the actual technical amendment bill was longer than the bill it was amending. And so it dealt with a lot of stuff that weren't technical amendments, but were substantive. And what Nancy Pelosi wanted to do is she was asking for unanimous consent on the floor of the House, when she'd already sent all the congressmen home, to approve these technical amendments. And Louie Gohmert actually got back to Washington, D.C. in time to say, no, we're not approving technical amendments until somebody can read them. And he forced them to give him the technical amendments. He read them, And he then, after reading them, lifted his objection to the unanimous consent, and they were passed in unanimous consent 12 hours later. The objections, what happened because of that, pretty brave action because people don't do that. Chip Roy did it earlier in the year on a bill, on an emergency spending bill. But it was because nowadays Congress gets these massive bills that have a lot of substance, but nobody reads them because they rush them through in a quote unquote emergency, and nobody knows what's in them, and you're supposed to just vote based on what you read in the Washington Post, which is insane. So Louis Gohmert forced him to be honest with it, and after he read it, he was able to tell senators what the objections were, and on the Senate side, they were able to get some amendments to it that were that the House agreed to without a vote, really. But they made some amendments, made some changes that fixed some problems on the Senate side, and created. So they got the bill done, but it was actually, truthfully, Frank, it's not how we're supposed to do our legislation. We're not supposed to sit there and say the speaker gets it, and the majority leader gets it, and somebody in the White House gets to look at it. But we didn't, unless you elected those individuals, unless you're from San Francisco, Kentucky, or you're, you probably elected the president. We elected the president, but but on the legislative end, you're supposed to have people from your own who actually represent you, part of the process, and this kind of rush things through without having anybody see it. Doesn't even meet the basic requirements of legislation.
And that's an old habit of Nancy.
They'll pass something which allows them to do this remotely, so they'll be able to get the documents remotely. They can communicate with their staff remotely, and they'll be able to then vote on these things remotely rather than having to give the Speaker of the House kind of carte blanche to do whatever the Speaker wants to do without having real oversight and real representation from all 435 districts and not just one.
Yeah, it's an old habit of Nancy Pelosi's, to cram things through.
You have to vote on it in order to see what's in it.
Unbelievable.
Like that with Obamacare, and we know how that turned out. So,
has anyone ever been able to translate one page of Obamacare, just out of curiosity? Okay, another quick question. Russ Vought, I believe. Russ Vought, I got it wrong on both accounts, is now with the OMB. Can you explain why you're a big fan of this?
Well, Russ has been the deputy director of Office of Management Budget. He actually, for people who want to YouTube stuff, he actually is the guy who Bernie Sanders attacked because he's a Christian, and he espoused the Christian worldview that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through the Son. In a paper he wrote in college at a Christian college. And so Bernie Sanders said that just made him too exclusionary to be entrusted as the deputy director of the OMB. The real reason Bernie Sanders opposed him was because Russ Vought is a real fiscal hawk. And it seemed hard to believe in this time of $1 trillion deficit, before they just spent $1 trillion on the healthcare emergency, that there's anybody in this world who are fiscal hawks, but Russ Vaught's one of those. He's effectively been running the Office of Management Budget while Mick Mulvaney, who's the director, was assigned to the Consumer Finance Protection Board to wrest its control out of the hands of people, Elizabeth Warren supporters, and then was over being the chief of staff for the White House. So Russ was running the OMB, but he didn't have the title of director.
Yeah.
And now he's going to be the director of OMB. And here, when you look at the president's budgets, the budgets they balance in 10 or 15 years, and they have real cuts, $4 trillion over 10 years.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for.
In the last couple. And they have real cuts. They have a real vision for how to get our country back on a fiscally sustainable path. Russ Vaught's the author of those. Russ Vaught's the person who goes up and defends those. Russ Vaught's the guy who actually understands how much money it costs to do stuff, where the bodies are buried in terms of waste, and knows where to go get that money. And here's the real key for me. On the regulatory side, people miss the regulatory side, and that's called it's the Office of Management Budget. Management's the regulatory side, budget's the budget side. On the regulatory side, OMB oversees every single regulation that is proposed in the government, every single one. And Russ Vought is in charge. There's somebody who's in charge of that section, but ultimately the buck stops at Russ Vought's office, and he's a guy who understands the impact of regulations on economic growth, and is a true red tape cutter at his heart. And so he's got both the fiscal chops and the bureaucratic bureaucratic cutting chops necessary to do the job. The president trusts him, so somebody doesn't have to get a learning curve, doesn't have to get a trust factor built in, and he is exactly the right guy for the job. And I'm glad the president picked him to be the full-time director, and I'm hoping the Senate will confirm him as rapidly as possible, because as we come out of this health emergency in 2 months, 3 months, whenever that is, we're going to need to make certain that we've got the regulations cut that are necessary for us to maximize the upward swing that's going to occur upon coming out. And Russ Vought's the right person to enact a temporary regulatory relief that will allow those businesses to thrive immediately once the emergency is done, and once we've got an environment where people can go out and spend again. That position is so important. Most people don't realize it, and Russ is the right guy. And I was very, very pleased. And obviously, I put out a press release that I made sure the president saw that praised him for that, because Russ is the right guy for the job. And I think he's leading us out of this mess we're in, this fiscal mess we're in, as well. Long term, he's the right guy to do that.
Yeah, it's like he's the chief bookkeeper. Is that correct? Is that the best way to look at it?
Yeah, it's kind of. I don't think he liked that term, but yeah, sure. He's because bookkeeper is passive. He's the accountant who's trying desperately to get the books, figure out a way to get the books to balance eventually, and is sitting there looking at 1,000 different line items and trying to figure out where he can cut on those line items, what things they can do to try to get the government as a whole to limit the amount of money they spend on one hand, and on the other hand, how we can get the regulations in such a way to get the businesses thriving, so tax revenues are up. By the way, Frank, that's one thing nobody's talking about. We have this self-induced economic stoppage.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to have a massive impact on revenues into the Treasury, massive impact, because if businesses aren't making money, what they're not doing? They're not paying sales tax to their state government, because nobody's buying stuff, so there's no sales tax revenue to state government. They're not paying their quarterly income tax is going to be through the floor in terms of how much money is coming in, and so you're going to look at a situation where the revenues on the revenue side, which have been increasing, even with the tax cut, have been increasing. Those revenues now are going to be devastated in the next fiscal year. So getting our fiscal house in order is not just on the side of cutting, but making certain businesses are in a condition where, not through raising taxes, but through being able to make a profit, are going to be back paying taxes and paying a lot of taxes at very low rates, because they're making very big profits. I'm going to sound like Trump when I talk that way, but it's actually true. So that's that to me is the other side of the equation. And Russ Vought knows we have to get the economy going, blasting off like a rocket ship, to get the revenue side working as well. And so in 2021, we end up with a budget that's much closer to balance than it was in 2019. And hopefully, if all the spending was temporary, we kind of washed that through the system as a one-time anomaly, and we're able to get back to real cuts that create a pathway to balance in our lifetimes, which seems, it's amazing that we're having to have that fight. But yeah, we have to have that fight right now. We have to say temporary payment deal, do temporary spending on the health emergency side, but really do investments that are going to make certain that those businesses survive this 60-day period and are able to come out the backside fighting for business and making money again, so that they survive and are able to thrive and become taxpayers again.
Yeah, now I must remind people the Dow can jump right back up. I mean, it was down at about 6,600 in 09, and it jumped up to about 10,000 in like it was about a month's time. You know, and the thing that we had happen back then is people didn't get jobs right away. There was still prolonged unemployment, and that was because of the administration that was in.
Well, the prolonged unemployment was largely because the administration didn't cut the regulations necessary. They were in fact piling on regulations on the private sector, and it's really hard to tell a private businessman, oh, go ahead and we want you to hire more people, but we're going to raise your taxes, and we're raising your taxes, and we're making it more costly to do business. You know, at that point, they don't invest in growing their business. They invest in trying to basically survive a regulatory onslaught. So that's what ended up happening with President Obama. It was the wrong approach, and it really delayed the recovery from the Great Recession pretty dramatically.
Absolutely.
And this president's approach is, let's unleash business, let's unleash the private sector. We're not just going to rely on the public sector. We're going to unleash the private sector, and we're going to make it so Americans are really back to work in record time, and those businesses are back up and running that have been shut down through no fault of their own. To meet this emergency. So that's the game. That's what's going to be done, and so I would expect a rapid expansion once the health emergency is over. But people, remember this: the stock market doesn't have, not a single dollar you put into the stock market actually goes to the companies unless they're selling stock. So by and large, when a company sells stock up front, what they're saying is, we want these people to invest in our business. Everything else is an aftermarket, and the original company isn't getting any money if the stock goes up 10% or down 10%, unless the company has, owns its own stock, buys it back in such a way to drive the value up. So and all shares of stock is the company saying, we're going to create this many pieces of our company that we're going to sell out to people, allow them to buy. And it might represent 25% of the company, might represent 90% of the company. But all it is that you're buying a share of the company, hence the word shares. But a company, if the same company can have a value of a stock value of $10 or $100, and that doesn't have any impact on the financing of that company. So so if we can keep those companies strong, companies with strong underlying fundamentals who are being battered right now, their stock price will go up when the market goes back up, when the economy is better, because their fundamentals are the same. Doesn't matter. That hasn't changed. What's changed is the ability for people to engage in the economy. And so you will end up with some really great bargains based on companies whose fundamentals are strong. It's just the economy was submarined out from under them deliberately to try to save potentially save millions of lives from this Chinese virus. So that would be, to me, where, when you're looking at this, if a company's down 30, 40, 50%, it doesn't mean the company's terrible. It means the company's, it just means they've been affected by the stock market. And after this is over, chances are they're going to regain much of that value, if not all that value. The question is, when do you want to buy in? What's your risk what's your risk tolerance, and everybody has their own, and you need to talk to either your financial advisor or talk to your one. The one thing you definitely should do is, if you're married, talk to your wife or talk to your husband. You really don't want to have them discover that you're all in on a company that ends up at zero, because companies can end up at zero in this environment. That's just a real risk.
It can happen. I can imagine hand sanitizer companies are doing good. I can imagine companies that provide remote work services like Zoom and Skype are probably
Zoom and Skype doing well. One of the things on hand sanitizers, this is interesting. A number of alcohol manufacturers, I'm talking, I don't know that this is the company, but companies like Jim Beam that make distilled liquor, a number of them are taking part of their capacity and turning it over to creating the alcohol for this and making hand sanitizers. And so they're going to flood the market with hand sanitizers to meet the immediate demand. Based upon the president's invoking the Defense Industries Act for the first time since the Korean War. And so they're moving production from doing one thing to another thing because there's a national need, national emergency. So one of the great things about having a private sector that's big and robust and has a lot of capacity is these businesses guys can sit there and they can shift production in such a way and relatively rapidly to meet immediate needs in a national emergency. And that's what we're seeing now. It's why, this is for all the millennials, it's why a private economy works much better than a government economy. Because a private economy has enough robustness, enough diversity, and the winners and losers. You don't have winners and losers being all the time picked by the government. Sometimes it's picked, and when it does, they do it wrong. But what you have is an economy that's there, ready to thrive because it's the private economy. And when a need arises, that private economy can shift on a dime with no bureaucrat Washington, D.C. needs to say anything. They can shift on a dime because they know their own production capacity. People like 3M is producing masks. People like, there's a whole bevy of different people, companies that are shifting production in ways to basically meet this health emergency.
Yeah.
And that's why the private sector works, because the private sector is millions upon millions of individual decisions that end up, which make up our economy. And those businesses then can make those are part of those decisions about what products they're going to provide. And because there's a demand for masks, we're going to start seeing a lot of masks produced here domestically. And because some of the government regulations that dictated what kind of masks could be produced for our healthcare sector and our EMTs and people like that, the emergency people, we're going to end up with the government getting walked out of the way in terms of regulations to allow for masks to be applied for different purposes than they were allowed for before. Similarly with drugs. The president talked quite a bit today about chloroquine, which a lot of people read about as a potential solution to the coronavirus, to the Chinese virus. And and they're expediting testing on that out of the FDA. They know the downside risks and how it affects people. Now they're trying to figure out through big, massive clinical tests, human testing, to find out what the right dosage is, so it does not harm people, but instead does the maximum amount of good. So they're going to try to figure out the dosage and put something on the market approve it for this particular use, at least in clinical trials and mass clinical trials, with the hope that they get enough data back that allows them to say, here's the amount of dosage you need, and tell every doctor in America the exact amount of dosage needed in order to have this drug that's been around for 70 years, this drug be effectively used against the coronavirus, the Chinese virus, which may in fact exist for 2, 3, 4 more months in a really active state. Give our doctors a tool to fight against it with. And the FDA is expediting everything. They're cutting the regs out like crazy. And as a result, and that's directly because the president told them to. He said, we've got to fight. You've got to get, it's interesting you got all these regulations, But right now we need medicine on the market, and your job is to make certain that medicine is on the market while still trying to meet your mission and making sure that it is safe. And so that's what we're getting. And once again, the FDA commissioner was on with the president today in the press conference. I would encourage people to take a look at that. He lays it out really succinctly and smartly, and gave me a lot of confidence that they're going to continue to do the right thing.
I've often said you need to monitor 3M stock, and you talked about 3M earlier. It's a good way to monitor what's actually going on in this country. It had dropped pretty significantly a few days ago, and it is back up to 139.30. So that's a good sign. Yes, it has a lot to do with the news reports about putting out coronavirus survival items. It does seem like this recovery will take a long time, and it will definitely be politicized. You already see it being heavily politicized. And it will probably affect the market, but I think it's just going to be one of those things that changes the economy, changes the marketplace. It might be something that we're joking about in a year. It might be something that we're dealing with still in a year. But it definitely feels like this is going to change things. It's going to change the country for a long time. And now, speaking of changes, I've got one quick question before we log off here. Tom Brady, no longer with the Patriots, now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the reason I bring this up is because I've been talking to people in the news business, and they've been saying we're very happy that we have another story other than coronavirus to talk about, because it's been.
Well, I think the big story in the NFL is with is the musical chairs of quarterbacks. There's going to be teams, probably 10 teams this year, that are going to have different quarterbacks. Cam Newton is essentially, he's not going to be with the Carolina Panthers. He's going to, yeah. We don't know where he's going to end up, but they signed Teddy Bridgewater to be their quarterback. We have people like Tom Brady moving to Tampa Bay, which means Jameis Winston doesn't have a job. Who knows where he ends up? The fact is, he really got used to throwing to people in other uniform colors, so he shouldn't have a problem adapting. You've got Dak Prescott, who's going to be with the Cowboys.
Do we know he's going to be with the Cowboys yet?
Got King's ransom, and because he was tagged, and as a result, he's going to get paid huge amounts of money. It was demanding $40 million a year, which I hope the Cowboys pay it, because I'm not a Cowboy fan, because he ain't worth it. But, you've got Phillip Rivers, who's moving out to Indianapolis, away from San Diego. San Diego's looking for a quarterback. So you're going to see a lot of familiar names in weird uniforms this year. And it happens every year, but I don't think I've ever seen it happen with quarterbacks quite the way it's happening this year. And if you really want to talk about a distorted market, the quarterback payment market, Ryan Tannehill, who was on the bench at the beginning of last year. The Tennessee Titans paid him $29 million a year to stick around. And anybody who watched the playoff game where they took away Derrick Henry as a running back knows that Ryan Tannehill is not a $29 million quarterback. But that's the market, and it's an interesting one, and it does give us something to pay attention to. And by the way, the one reason people like paying attention to this part of the football season is because it's like we can all have our own ideas about what should happen, and it's completely free from risk because everybody's an expert and nobody has to be held accountable except for those people actually have jobs as general managers. Yeah. So we can all have our opinions and talk about it, but there's no accountability. Whereas in at least my business, if my opinions many times do in fact influence policy. And, so if you're influencing policy, you have to be very, very circumspect, and you can't just shoot from the hip. You got to think things through. And whereas with football, man, I don't have to think it through at all. I can say anything I want. The Redskins should trade their number 2 pick in the draft, get a ransom for it, trade Trent Williams, get a second-round draft pick from that, and basically rebuild their team with the 5 or 6 draft picks that they get, with the hope that they can actually build a team for 2022. Because they're not going to go anywhere this year. They should trade Dwayne Haskins. If they want to take Tua at 2, they should trade Dwayne Haskins to a team like the Tampa Bay team, which is looking to will be looking for a backup for Brady, and let Haskins have a couple of years working under Brady, and so then he actually learns how to be a quarterback and try to get a number 2 pick and maybe number 5 for Haskins, who was a rookie last year and showed some promise. So if you're going to pick Tua, get rid of last year's rookie and get something of value for him. So there's lots of things you can do, and I can have all those opinions. And guess what? It doesn't matter. We can just have fun thinking about it, and so we don't have to be consumed with the numbers on the coronavirus chart. We can actually talk about something that's a little bit more fun.
And I have heard that from a few people now. They just want to talk about something other than coronavirus. Another thing.
All I care about is as long as Major League Baseball comes back sometime this year. I don't think I could stand a full year without Major League Baseball. We need Major League Baseball back, hopefully by June 1. Or June 15, and they have half a season. But we need Major League Baseball, and the football stuff. I'm not a big NFL fan anymore, but sports plays a role. It's a diversion. It doesn't really matter. It's a diversion. It's entertainment, and it's something that we talk about it because we need to take our mind off the seriousness of a disease that could kill millions of us. At some level. I feel much better having watched some of these press conferences with the president because we have real professionals in charge who are doing everything they can to try to save American lives while put us in a position to be able to recover rapidly on the economic side. And so while we're sitting at home, working from home, doing all that, we also are going to see a transformation because the business are going to decide, hey, I can have half my employees working from home. I can do these things remotely. And as a result, they may end up saying, I don't need as much rental space. I don't need as many. I can have people doing different things remotely without having the same 1950s kind of model of an office building. And so, I think we're also going to psychologically change how we do business, and hopefully we'll psychologically change how we do government and discover those employees who no longer are needed because they're out. The essence of the internet economy has made it so the job functions they perform are no longer necessary, and so we'll be able to allow those people to move on to more productive pursuits within the private sector rather than continuing to collect a government paycheck doing stuff that isn't actually productive. So those are some things that I hope will occur. We have to be smart. We have an opportunity to transform our economy dramatically in a positive way if we're smart about this and we think about it. And I'm hoping that at the governmental level that we do that because I think we're going to discover we don't need 2 million private sector bureaucrats and non-defense bureaucrats to run this country. I think we're going to discover we need quite a bit fewer. And if we do that, we'll be able to put people into a perspective that is, or put people in more productive positions and save taxpayers money and cut the size and scope of government, even in spite of spending probably $1.5 trillion to try to keep the economy together for the next 2 months.
There is a lot of people sitting around in the government who take a lot of government money, and it is hard to see. But go back to the private sector, we were talking about these outrageous sports contracts, and we've been hearing about that for at least 30 years about how outrageous these contracts are. Right. But the reality is, if you look at what they do for television ratings and for merchandising numbers, they're not as outrageous as you might think. I mean, just look at what these athletes can do for a product that they endorse or for television ratings.
Absolutely. Mike Trout is the highest paid player in Major League Baseball. And to quote, and he's played for the Los Angeles Angels, to quote the Los Angeles Dodgers team president a year or two ago, it said, if Mike Trout's not with the Angels, nobody watches the Angels. And so which isn't true, but it's a shame that Mike Trout, because he's so good, because he's the best player, of his generation, perhaps the best player of all time, although I think Babe Ruth will have something to say about that.
Yeah.
But he's viewed as being one of the best players in history. There's a lot of people want to see Mike Trout, and we never know about people who they really are. He seems to be a genuinely good guy.
Yeah.
And as a result, he's somebody you can feel comfortable about rooting for. And I will unabashedly tell you that I don't own many jerseys. I own a Trout jersey. And I own a hat with a Trout on it. I am a Mike Trout, completely in the tank for Mike Trout.
Yeah.
And so I really hope that he stays the same kid from Millville, New Jersey, who he came into the major leagues as being, and doesn't get ruined by making $35 million a year forever, it seems like. But, he can sure hit a baseball. He sure can catch a baseball. He can throw a baseball. And for somebody who aspired in his life to actually do that for a living, but discovered he couldn't hit, throw, or catch, I just, you put people like you can, you sit there and you say you root for them because it's something you have tried and love doing, but just weren't able to do it well enough to make a living at it.
And what Mike Trout really needs now is a championship.
What Mike Trout needs is he needs me as his PR guy because I'm the only. Every conversation turns into about Mike Trout, but They do need a championship, and one of the critical aspects of a semi-salary cap league, because with the luxury tax of baseball, you have essentially a salary cap. There's a downside to making a lot of money, and that is that one player is taking up a significant portion of the amount of salary you can pay. And so you're really dependent on the team drafting well and having a strong minor league system, so they have a lot of low-cost players, like the Washington Nationals had with Juan Soto last year, low-cost players that make $600,000 a year. So you can pay people like, say, Ryan Zimmerman last year, who made $18 million last year. And so you got a wide disparity in terms of income, but those players that make $650,000 last year, in a few years, when they hit free agency, they will make those tens of millions of dollars if they have the value. And if they don't have the value, they'll be washed out of the league because they'll be replaced by somebody who makes $600,000 a year. So that's the way baseball works. It's the way football works. And we just need but it's really fun to speculate and talk about it because, we all can have opinions. Once again, we can all have opinions and they don't matter, and we can argue about it. It doesn't matter. It's all fun because we're arguing about something that we mutually love, and that is sports.
Yeah.
So with that, that's my sports talk for the day. My sports economics talk for the day.
Now,
I want to talk about hitting a curveball. I can never figure out how to do that, so I can't tell you.
I did good in baseball up until about age 14, and then I fizzled. But I did some other things that after that I ended up doing pretty good with. But the thing about Mike Trout is I'm reminded of Brian.
You want to talk about professional wrestling?
Can we change the subject, please?
Okay.
But by the way, guys, I got to point this out. People joke about wrestling, but look at the ratings numbers it's brought in over the years. Look at the social media numbers. Look at the merchandising numbers, the pay-per-view buy rates, the arena attendance. I remember talking one time to someone, to Mayor Kurt Schmoke. He was the former mayor of Baltimore. And I was talking to he and one of his staffers, and his staffer was saying off the record that they were struggling to figure out a way to sell out Baltimore Arena. They couldn't do it. They couldn't get people to come to the arena. Not for concerts, not for mud shows with trucks driving through mud, and not for exhibition sports games. They couldn't figure out a way to sell arena out. The only way they could do it was with professional wrestling, and they had the two major promotions just coming in every month and just selling the place out. Then everything else, they couldn't get anyone to buy a ticket. And so, again, you could joke about it, but it does do good with merchandising, arena attendance.
I don't joke about it. It is valid entertainment, and entertainment takes a lot of different forms, and and professional wrestling is a combination of it's basically weightlifters doing ballet, and it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and it is entertainment. They say it's the male soap opera. I remember one thing I once heard during my run in that business was I'm going to reveal the Colonel's secret about pro wrestling. I'm going to reveal the Coca-Cola recipe about pro wrestling. You ready? You want to sit back? You want to sit down for this? There's the secret about pro wrestling. It's real. And by that I mean being that they're reenacting what goes on in life. They're acting out our battles in the day-to-day living that we do. And the fans actually live vicariously through the wrestlers who, quote, tell the story. And by telling the story, you have to go through what people go through in their life. And so that's why people stop and start watching. That's the theory. And you have these charismatic figures, and people are living vicariously through them as they tell the story. That's the expression in the business.
I think that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. It's, at some level, it is a physical soap opera, and people root for certain characters, and those wrestlers aren't necessarily characters that they're playing, but they're playing a character, and they're very and they use their physical prowess and their agility and their athleticism and their strength to be able to put on a show that has a rooting narrative based upon what's happening in the world. I remember Sergeant Slaughter back in the day, who came in, and it was he was pro-American, and then you had others who were running around, and it was just part of it was a soap opera that was being played out, but it was a soap opera that dealt with what was really happening in the world. And so now maybe Vince McMahon's going to come up with the human virus or the Chinese virus. Be some little person who's going to take on and beat big giant wrestlers for a while. I don't know. It's just Vince McMahon is a brilliant guy because he's figured out how to tell stories that people want to see, and tell them in such an entertaining way that they'll put good money out of their pocket into his in order to see the product, the play, the theater that he's putting on in the show.
Yeah.
And it's live theater, and it's new, and it's different every single day, and that is and it involves extraordinarily talented athletes.
And
I've just said more about wrestling now than I've said in 20 years, and more than I will say in another 20 years.
And also it dominates the podcasting industry now too. And I must note another thing.
Enough wrestling talk, Frank.
Okay, but Vince, just to change the subject back before
we've always stayed over with wrestling talk.
Okay, yes, we have. But I just wanted to say Vince McMahon also introduced many to Donald Trump in the late 80s. But, okay. Donald Trump went on to become president using wrestling metaphors.
Donald Trump did in fact Vince McMahon on the apron outside of the ring in a YouTube video that can be viewed to this day.
Yes, and shaved his head. And
then Donald Trump hired Vince McMahon's wife to be. Shaved his head, and then Donald Trump hired Vince McMahon's wife to be the head of Small Business Administration for a few years.
Yeah. And
she now runs the America Priorities First organization as the chairman of that organization. So Linda McMahon,
that is correct.
Oh, he hasn't figured out a way to hire Stephanie McMahon in Triple H. He hasn't found a way to hire Stephanie McMahon in Triple H. But I did get a chance to meet Linda McMahon a few months ago. She's a delightful lady. She really is a delightful lady. So I was kind of surprised. I thought there would be more of a sneer to her, and she was really a nice person.
Yeah, that by some accounts, others aren't huge fans of hers, but she was a Trump appointee and did pretty well with that SBA for a while, these are brilliant business people. They understand merchandising. They understand TV. They understand the internet. They're very, very, very brilliant business people. But we are.
The truth is, you got to be tough. You got to be tough as nails to be a business person. And Linda McMahon came across a very nice lady to me, but I'm confident that she has a backbone of steel. So
that's what I've heard.
She can be able to stick with Vince McMahon. So it's it's really an interesting pairing, but I think we're towards the end of this thing.
Yeah, we've gone over here a long time, but it has been an interesting talk, and we'll talk again tomorrow. But for Rick Manning at ALG, the ALG president, please subscribe. I'm Frank McCaffrey, and thank you for watching. I'm going to get out of here.